Hey guys, I'm JC and today we're playing Yeva Nature's Herald. This is a creature-based deck that looks to take advantage of Yeva's ability to operate at instant speed and wins through either combat or combo. If you want to build this deck yourself, then make sure to stop by the channel where we have a deck tech discussing all of the included cards as well as the overall strategy. Let's see just what's possible when a mono green deck can operate at instant speed. Alright guys, let's see who our opponents are playing today. We've got Urza Lord High Artificer, we have the Ur-Dragon, and we also have Rielle the Everwise. Alright, if we look at our opening hand, it's quite strong. We've got a lot of ramp, we have interaction, card draw, and creature interactions, so this is a pretty strong keep. Especially against commanders like Urza and Rielle, we definitely want that Ulvenwald tracker there. I'm sure it's going to be able to pull some work if it actually sticks around. And it looks like two of our opponents keep their opening 7, but Rielle goes down to 6. Now we draw a Return of the Wild Speaker, so more card draw. That's always what we want to see in a mono green deck, so let's just start by playing our Forest for turn, and we'll cast our Arbor Elf. And then we'll pass it to our opponents. Urza plays a land, and now they cast a Ponder. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back in any order. You may shuffle and draw a card. And they end the turn there. The Ur-Dragon plays a fetch land. They crack it straight away. And they put a Ketria Triome into play tapped. And that is it for their turn. Rielle plays a tap land for turn, and then they pass the turn. We draw an Endurance for turn. Another card that's going to be useful, specifically against the Rielle player, who does usually like to have a pretty full graveyard. So we'll play our Wirewood Lodge, then we'll cast our Llanowar Elves. We'll use Arbor Elf to untap our Forest, and then we'll get our Ulvenwald tracker into play while we can, before the Urza or Rielle player can interact. At least on the stack. And that is going to be us done. So we've gotten off to a pretty strong start so far. Fingers crossed we just don't see a board wipe over the next couple of turns. Urza plays a land. And now they cast a Sensei's Divining Top. You can pay 1 to look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back in any order. You can tap, draw a card, then put Sensei's on top of its owner's library. Next, they cast a Voltaic Key. Pay 1, untap target artifact. And it looks like that's it for them. The Ur-Dragon plays another fetch land for turn. They crack it straight away. Then they cast a Farseek. And then they end the turn there. Rielle plays a land. And now they cast an Izzet Signet. And that is it for their turn. Alright, we draw a Cogler the Titan Ape. So while we normally do like to play things at flash speed, I think I'd actually like to resolve our Yeva here, because that's going to turn our Rishkar's Expertise and Return of the Wild Speaker on, so we can hopefully draw more cards. Even just a land or two, so we can start making our land drops. So let's do that. That resolves. Then we'll just move to combat and we'll hit the Urza player before they start getting any big constructs down. And that'll be it for us. Urza activates their Sensei's Divining Top in their upkeep. And now they cast an Ichor Wellspring. When it ETBs or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. So they will get to draw a card off its trigger. But it looks like that's it for the Urza player. The Ur-Dragon plays a fetch land. And now they cast a Dragon Tempest. Whenever a creature with flying ETBs under your control, it gains haste until end of turn. Then whenever a dragon ETBs under your control, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the number of dragons you control. Now they crack their fetch land. They put a Savai Triome into play tapped. And they end the turn. And Rielle starts their turn by casting their commander, Rielle the Everwise. Rielle gets +1/+0 for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards for the first time each turn, draw that many cards. Next, they play a Bazaar of Baghdad. It's a land that you can tap to draw 2 cards, then discard 3 cards. Very powerful card in a Rielle deck. Basically acts as a land that draws a lot of cards while Rielle's out. And that is it for them. We draw a land for turn, which is actually really nice to see. So we'll play that land. Next, we'll move to combat. We'll send Yeva towards the Urza player once again. And this is where we'll pass the turn. Now we'll look to cast our Return of the Wild Speaker. But hopefully the Urza player will tap out and we'll look to do it in the Ur-Dragon player's turn, because I don't really want to try doing it on the Rielle player's end step. They'll likely counter it, so we'll just pass the turn from here. Now on our end step, Rielle does activate their Bazaar of Baghdad. So they're going to draw 2, discard 3. Then they'll draw 3 thanks to Rielle's ability. So that puts them back up to 7 cards in hand. And now we move to the Urza player's turn. They start by activating their Senseis once again in their upkeep. Now they play a land for turn. And now they tap out for a Trinket Mage. When Trinket Mage ETBs, you may search your library for an artifact card with mana value 1 or less, reveal that card, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. Likely they go for a Soul Ring here. Let's see what they get. And they find themselves a Mana Vault, which is actually a really good card to find with Voltaic Key. And that is it for them. The Ur-Dragon plays a Zeatora's Proving Ground into play tapped. But now they just move straight to their end step. Well, in response, we're going to cast our Return of the Wild Speaker now. That resolves, and we actually draw quite a few good cards. So now we can move to the Rielle player's turn. Rielle starts by casting Balmor, Battlemage Captain. It has flying, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain trample until end of turn. Next, they play a tap land for turn, which does allow them to scry 1. And now they cast a Library of Lang. You have no maximum hand size. If an effect causes you to discard a card, discard it, but you may put it on top of your library instead of into your graveyard. Then they activate their Bazaar straight away. So they'll once again draw 2, then discard 3 and trigger Rielle's ability. And that is it for their turn. We draw a land for turn. Well, let's start by playing a forest. Next, we'll cast our Wild Growth. And now with our Arbor Elf being able to untap a forest, we're going to be able to generate 4 total mana from it, 2 from tapping it originally and then untapping it with Arbor Elf. Now we'll move to combat. We'll swing Yeva in at the Urza player. They just take the damage. And like any good Yeva player, we're just going to pass the turn and we're going to react depending on what our opponents do. Urza starts by casting a Mana Vault. Now they use their Voltaic Key to untap their Mana Vault. They're going to tap it down once again, giving them 5 colorless mana, and now they play a Blinkmoth Urn. At the beginning of each player's pre-combat main phase, if Blinkmoth Urn is untapped, that player adds colorless for each artifact they control. Next, they cast a Sapphire Medallion. Blue spells are going to cost 1 colorless less to cast. And now they activate their Sensei's Divine in top. So it looks like the Urza player is setting themselves up for a big turn next turn. Hopefully we'll have something to say about that by the time it gets back to our turn. And that is it for the Urza player. The Ur-Dragon starts by casting Nicol Bolas the Ravager. When it ETBs, each opponent discards a card and they can transform it into a big scary Nicol Bolas Planeswalker. And it looks like they put the Dragon Tempest trigger onto our Arbor Elf. They'll allow the Nicol Bolas trigger to go through, we'll all discard a card. We'll discard our Forest. Now that will trigger Rielle, so they'll get to draw a card. Now before we lose our Arbor Elf here, we're going to float the mana, so we'll tap down our Forest with Wild Growth on it, and we'll use Arbor Elf to untap it. Then we'll allow the Dragon Tempest trigger to resolve. Then we're actually going to try to get our Kogla down here, because that's going to allow us to take out Rielle. That resolves, so we'll have Kogla fight Rielle. Rielle goes down. Now the Ur-Dragon moves to combat, and the Nicol Bolas attacks the Urza player. They take the damage going down to 27, and that is it for the Ur-Dragon player. Blinkmoth Urn triggers on Rielle's first main phase. They're going to add 2 colorless mana here. They use that mana to cast a Thought Vessel, so now they have no maximum hand size. They play a land for turn, a Shinka the Bloodsoaked Keep, and now they recast their commander Rielle. Now they immediately activate their Bazaar. That triggers Rielle, so they're going to draw 3 cards. And that is it for their turn. We draw a Soul of the Harvest. Well, we're certainly not going to be lacking for card draw. It looks like in our first main phase, Rielle actually responds to the Blinkmoth Urn trigger by cycling their Lonely Sandbar. That allows them to discard and draw with Rielle. So we'll start by moving to combat. We're actually going to swing at the Ur-Dragon player here, because that Dragon Tempest is starting to snipe off some of our utility creatures, which we don't want. That triggers our Kogla. That takes their Dragon Tempest out. Ur-Dragon takes the damage going down to 30. And because I don't want the Urza player untapping with that Blinkmoth Urn to give them access to a lot of mana, I think we'll actually try to get our Rishkar's Expertise off. Okay, so we draw a number of good cards there. Quite a lot of card draw. Apex Altasaur is going to be really good to clean up the board soon. But I think we need to put our Acidic Slime into play. So we'll cast that. At ETBs, we'll take out the Blinkmoth Urn. And we'll play our land for turn. And then we'll just have to pass the turn there. We have to discard 3 cards. Let's get rid of the Forest. Primordial Sage. And we'll go another Forest. Now on Urza's upkeep, their Mana Vault triggers. So they can pay 4 to untap it. Otherwise it deals 1 damage to them. And they decide to leave it tapped, so it deals 1 damage. Now they start by using their Voltaic Key, untapping the Mana Vault. And then they cast their commander, Urza Lord High Artificer. When Urza ETBs, it creates a construct token. And also you can tap an untapped artifact you control to add a blue, and then you can pay 5 to shuffle your library, then exile the top card. Until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. So the construct's currently a 6/6. And now they cast a Karn Temporal Sundering. Target player takes an extra turn after this one, return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and then it gets exiled. And they're actually targeting their own Trinket Mage with the bounce effect. Okay, this is not going to be good news for us. An Urza player with access to all that mana isn't going to be good. They do only have 3 cards in hand though, so we might get fortunate that they don't have too much that they can do next turn. But a Sensei's Divining Top certainly going to help filter them to better draws. And now they play a Winter Orb. Definitely the card you don't want to see playing it against an Urza player. As long as Winter Orb is untapped, players can't untap more than 1 land during their untap step. Now they activate their Sensei's Divining Top. And that is it for their turn. But now we move to the extra turn. Their Mana Vault triggers on their upkeep. They use their Voltaic Key to untap it. So now they won't lose the damage in their draw step. Next they cast a Grim Monolith. So another big mana producing rock. And now they play a Darksteel Forge. Artifacts you control have indestructible. Alright, well that definitely makes blocking the construct token much more of a worse proposition now. And finally they finish up by recasting their Trinket Mage. Let's see what they find this time. And they get themselves a Manifold Key, so another untap effect. Now they move to combat, but they actually decide to pass straight through combat, and that is it for their turn. Alright, well, let's hope we get lucky and one of our other 2 opponents there have some sort of bounce effect for the Winter Orb. It's likely going to be the Rielle player that does. That'd be really good for us to be able to untap. We're definitely set up the best at the moment to break through the Winter Orb, just because we do have access to some mana, and getting our Earthcraft down is going to help us out a lot, but going 1v1 against the Urza player, I feel like that's going to be a losing proposition for us at the moment, just because of that Darksteel Forge. So now the Ur-Dragon player starts by just going straight to combat. Likely they're going to swing at the Urza player here, and they do. So it might be a case of player removal is the best type of removal, especially because Rielle does have a flyer. Not a big flyer, but every bit of chip damage is going to help here. That knocks Urza down to 22. And that is it for their turn. Rielle starts by playing a land for turn, a Reliquary Tower. Now they cast a Decanter of Endless Water. Once again, they have no maximum hand size, and it is just a mana rock. Now they move to combat, but they actually decide to keep their flyer back, perhaps wanting to defend against the big construct token, and that is it for their turn. On our untap step, we're going to untap our forest, so the Wild Growth is definitely putting in work here this game with this single land. Before we move to our draw step, the Urza player actually activates their Sensei's Divining Top. They probably know we have the ability to start taking Urza out. Now, they're definitely going to have enough mana to be able to recast it next turn, but if we keep hitting it turn after turn, eventually it is going to become too expensive to resolve and do anything else with their commander, especially with only 1 card in hand. And we draw an Emergent Zone. Very happy to see a land at the moment, so let's play that. Now let's see if we can resolve our Earthcraft. That's going to help us break through the Winter Orb, and luckily for us it does resolve. Next we're going to tap down our commander, and now we're going to fight Urza. Urza goes down, and I think we just passed the turn there. Mana Vault triggers on Urza's upkeep. They leave it tapped, so they will take 1 damage on their draw step. Now they use their Voltaic Key to untap their Grim Monolith. And now they recast their commander Urza, which unfortunately for the table is going to make another construct token. So it's a bit of a catch-22. We can remove Urza to stop them from having access to a lot of mana and card advantage, but every time we remove it, they are making more and more constructs, which are indestructible and are going to eventually get through. And no doubt we're going to be the target of the constructs, seeing as we're probably the ones that are breaking out from their Winter Orb more than any other player. Now they activate their Sensei's Divining Top. Now they activate their top, drawing a card, and then put in Sensei's back on top of their library. And finally they cast Spellskite, which isn't good news. They can use it to change a target of target spell or ability to Spellskite. Oh, we have a response from the Ur-Dragon player. In response, they actually cast Beast Within. That's really good to see some help from the other players. That is going to take Urza out. Unless, of course, they do have a response in hand. They do have 2 cards. Every chance in a mono blue deck. It looks like they don't. So Urza gets taken out once again. Now Spellskite resolves. They move to combat. But they actually decide to pass through combat, surprisingly. Hey, we'll take it. And that is it for their turn. The less they pressure our life totals, the more I think we're going to be able to break out of this. Especially if we can get our Elvish Archdruid down. By the time we hit our next turn, that's going to give us access to a lot more mana. Wirewood's going to be able to help us untap it. So I think we're looking pretty good at the moment. We just don't really want to see a board wipe come down at the moment. That would be the worst thing. And I don't think the other players will, just knowing that the Urza player has those indestructible constructs there. Now the Ur-Dragon player does untap their Jetmir's Garden. They move straight to combat. Once again, Nicol Bolas goes towards Urza. And that is it for the Ur-Dragon player. Rielle untaps 1 land. And they do have decent access to a bit of mana this turn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They definitely have the potential to do some things if they want to. And it looks like they cast Haughty Djinn. Flying, Haughty Djinn's power is equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard, and instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Quite useful in the current environment, especially when we're trying to take down the Urza player. That resolves. So it's currently a 6-4. Now the Rielle player moves to their end step. We're going to activate Earthcraft. Now we'll tap it down for mana. We'll tap another creature. And let's see if we can get our Elvish Archdruid into play. That resolves. And to show the beauty of Earthcraft, we're going to use our creatures to untap as many lands as we can, breaking out of the lock of the Urza player. And now let's move to our turn. On our turn, we're going to untap our Wirewood Lodge. And we draw a Thorn Mammoth, so another fight effect, which is really good to see. So I think we'll actually start this turn by fighting the Spellskite, just so the Urza player doesn't have protection for their commander. But it has Indestructible because I forgot there was an artifact, so that was a bit of a misplay on my behalf. So I think instead what we'll do here, we'll tap down our Elvish Archdruid. We'll use one of that mana to untap the Elvish Archdruid. We'll tap it down again. And we'll get down our Soul of the Harvest so we can start drawing more cards. We could resolve our Oran Frostfang and start attacking the Ur-Dragon player to draw cards, but I want to show that we're presenting a bit of a united front against the Urza player at the moment. So I'll try not to attack them. Because we don't know our opponent, sometimes they will make a spite play if we start attacking them, even if it is for a couple of points of damage. Better to be safe than sorry in an online environment. And unfortunately, because we don't have flyers to get over the top, we are just going to have to pass the turn to the Urza player and hope they can't do anything too crazy before it gets back to our next turn. So that'll be it for our turn. Now the one saving grace for us is the Urza player doesn't get to untap their lands. It's only a small consolation prize, but we'll take what we can get. Mana Vault does trigger on their upkeep. They leave it tapped, so they are going to take a damage in their draw step. I think they've got to be careful here. They should know that the other players at the table are going to be attacking their life totals pretty aggressively, especially with the Nicol Bolas and hopefully a Haughty Djinn from the Rielle player. Now they use their Voltaic Key untapping their Mana Vault. Now they cast the Manifold Key. It also notably does have an effect where target creature can't be blocked this turn, which is going to be dangerous against those construct tokens. Now they use the Manifold Key to untap the Grim Monolith. And finally they cast a Vidalcan Ori, so they are going to be able to cast their spells as though they had flash. They've just put a Yeva effect onto the battlefield pretty much. Luckily with one card in hand at the moment, we don't have to worry about it too much. It is just something to keep in mind going forward, especially if the Urza player does hang around. We actually have a response from the Rielle player, it looks like. And they cast an Izzet Charm, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2. Which it looks like they're not going to be able to do, and that actually causes the Urza player to scoop it up there, so it looks like winter came too early for them. Now that does trigger Balmor. The Izzet Charm now fizzles, now the Urza player's out of the game. And now we move to the Ur-Dragon player's turn, and they are the first ones to get to untap, so let's see what they can do with it. Luckily Nicol Bolas can't transform at the moment, unless of course they have some sort of ritual effect in hand. Now they play a fetch land for turn. Now they move straight to combat. Nicol Bolas comes towards us. We'll just take the damage for this one. And now they cast a Blasphemous Act. Okay, something we didn't want to see, but they were definitely holding on to that. Alright, well, great thing about Yeva is we can float all this mana and then get her back down. So I think that's what we'll do. Now on our last activation of Earthcraft, it looks like Rielle's actually activating Tolarian Winds. Discard all the cards in your hand, then draw that many cards. That is going to trigger Balmor. It's also going to draw them a lot of cards. They're going to go from 5 to 10 cards after this. Now we'll activate Kogla. That's going to bounce our Ulvenwald Tracker back to our hand. It's also going to give Kogla Indestructible so we can keep it around. And I do like keeping around our Kogla. And then we'll let the Blasphemous Act resolve. We'll return Yeva to the command zone. Now the Ur-Dragon player casts the Nature's Law. Now they crack their fetch land. They put Aspara's Headquarters into play tapped. Now we'll recast Yeva. Now we'll tap Yeva. We'll play out our Frostfang so we can draw some cards. And then while the Rielle player's tapped out, we'll also resolve our Ulvenwald Tracker. And let's move to the Rielle player's turn. Rielle starts by playing Haunted Cloak. Equipped creature has Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. Now they play a land for turn, a Riptide Laboratory. Now they cast Will, Scholar of Throst. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. +1 up to one target creature has base power and toughness 0 until your next turn. -3 draw 2 cards, which it looks like they're doing. And -7 exile up to 5 target permanents. For each permanent exiled this way, its controller creates a 4/4 blue and red elemental creature token. And it looks like that's it for them. We draw a Defiler of Vigor for turn. Okay, well there's our finisher. So let's start by moving to combat first. We'll send everything we can at the Rielle player. I'm not too concerned about their Planeswalker at the moment. I value the card draw a lot more. That does trigger Kogler. I'll take out the Haunted Cloak. just so we don't get one-shotted. Even though we do have endurance in hand, there is every chance they can counter it, so we have to hedge our bets here. In response, they activate their Bazaar, drawing 2, then discarding 3. But it looks like they have no responses to that. The Haunted Cloak gets taken out. Now they take the hit, we draw 3 cards. We get ourselves a Timeless Witness, beautiful. We have a pretty full graveyard at the moment. A Guardian Project, more card draw, great. And finally, a Sylvan Library. Okay, all the card draw we want, as well as access to any cards that we want as well. So all I think we'll do from here is we'll cast our Sylvan Library, and then we'll pass the turn there. We'll hold up mana and see what our other opponents do. If we get into a bit of a counter war with the Rielle player, so be it. We have a lot of card draw at the moment, so that can help us balance out against the control player. Let's just hope that we don't see a board wipe from either player, and we should be in a pretty good position. The Ur-Dragon starts by playing a land for turn. And now they cast a Ruinous Ultimatum, destroy all non-land permanents your opponents control. We have a response here from the Rielle player. Do they counter it? I don't think they would. They actually do. Forbid. It has buyback, discard 2 cards, counter target spell. Okay, very, very good news for us. I mean, they may have an answer in their hand. It could be a Cyclonic Rift. But at the moment, we'll take it. And that is it for their turn. Rielle starts by activating their Will, targeting our Kogla, to give it base power and toughness 0/2 until end of turn. Now they play a land for turn. And now they recast their commander Rielle. She comes in as a 10/3 and does have haste. Now they cast Faithless Looting, drawing 2 and then discarding 2. It also has flashback for 3. That's going to trigger Rielle, drawing them an additional 2 cards. And now they cast Slip Through Space. It has Devoid, target creature can't be blocked this turn, and draw a card. We'll let that resolve. Now they move to combat. Let's see who they swing in at. Probably going to be us, but we'll just be sure before we do anything. And they are. We'll activate our Elvenwald Tracker, and we'll use Yeva to fight Rielle. Hopefully that goes through. And that does. We'll put Yeva back into the command zone. That takes out Rielle. And that is it for their turn. We draw a Great Henge for turn. Our Sylvan Library also triggers. So we'll use the ability. And we have 2 lands there. We'll pay the 8 life to keep both cards in hand. Then we'll play a Forest for turn. Now we'll move to combat. We'll swing both creatures in at the Rielle player again. Hoggle can destroy their Library of Lang. Just interfere with their filtering a little bit. Our Frostfang triggers. We draw a card. An Augur of Autumn. So we certainly see all the card draw this game, but we haven't really gotten access to a lot of our big mana dorks. Seems they must be all clumped up in our deck. So we might just start by playing our Devour of Vigor. That's going to start to help to reduce the cost of the spells in our hand anyway. Then we'll cast our Great Henge for 2 mana. That's going to trigger our Defiler, put in a 1/1 counter on each of our creatures. The Rielle player lets that go through. Then we'll cast our Augur of Autumn. That also triggers Defiler. And now we'll also get to see what's on top of our library, which we currently have a Forest, which we're going to draw into. And we do have a Fyndhorn Elves on the top of our deck. Let's use our Augur of Autumn. Let's cast our Fyndhorn Elves. That triggers Defiler. We're really seeing the power of Defiler of Vigor here. I was absolutely excited when it actually got spoilt. Absolute powerhouse in these kind of decks. That triggers the Great Henge. We're going to draw our Glade Muse. Now we'll try to recast Yeva. That triggers Defiler once again. We have another Forest on top of our library, which we'll draw. And we have Selvala, so there's one of our big mana dorks, which we can cast, but I think we're done now for the turn. Let's just pass and hope we get to keep our board state, because I think if we do, if we can get back to our turn, we're going to be able to win the game just through pure combat damage. So we have to discard 3 cards. Let's get rid of 2 Forests and our Glade Muse. We've got more than enough card draw online at the moment. And let's see what the Ur-Dragon player has for us. Hopefully not another board wipe, but really, we saw the worst one come down. That Ruinous Ultimatum was probably the worst one we could hope to see, maybe beyond a farewell. Ur-Dragon starts by cycling their Rogrum Triome. It looks like they're hunting for an answer to what we're doing. Now they play a tap land for turn, as Xander's Lounge. And now they cast Dragonlord Colligan. Fly and haste, other creatures you control have haste. Whenever an opponent casts a creature or planeswalker spell with the same name as a card in their graveyard, that player loses 10 life. Alright, they move to combat. We know where they're going. Yep, it comes towards us. We're going to have to take the damage. So reducing the effectiveness of our Defiler just by a little bit. We go down to 20. And that is it for the Ur-Dragon player. Alright, well with 8 cards in hand, let's see what their Rielle player can do. I mean, a Cyclonic Rift here would pretty much undo us. Doesn't mean we're out of the game, but it certainly sets us back quite a bit. So now they start by recasting their commander Rielle. Okay, well that's good news. We dodged the Cyclonic Rift at least. They certainly could have a Blasphemous Act of their own, which it doesn't look like it's in their graveyard at the moment. Oh, yes, it is actually. So we've dodged the Blasphemous Act as well. Rielle comes in as a 12/3. So if they're able to give her something like Double Strike, that could take us out if it gets through. And now they cast Turbulent Dreams, X equals 8. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard X cards. Return X target non-land permanents to their owner's hands. Wow, that's actually pretty good. I wasn't expecting that. Now that does trigger Rielle. So let's see what they've targeted. They've definitely targeted the Defiler, Oran. We have got Kogla there, our commander, our fight spell, Earthcraft, Sylvan Library, the Great Henge. Okay, well, we will respond here. So we'll activate Earthcraft, tapping down Yeva. And we'll cast Selvala off the top of our library. That triggers our Defiler. So Selvala here is definitely going to let us be able to recast a lot of these creatures. So that triggers our Great Henge. Selvala gets a counter, we draw the Forest. Now we have a Shaman of the Forgotten Ways. Okay, this is good. Let's go again. So we'll activate Earthcraft. We'll tap down Selvala. Now we'll cast the Shaman using the Defiler once again. I'll tell you what, this Defiler is doing a lot of work. I mean, definitely in help with Earthcraft. Earthcraft is just a busted, beautiful card in this kind of deck. That does trigger Defiler. We're also going to be able to activate Shaman's Formidable ability. So we might be able to take the players out here. That triggers the Great Henge. We'll draw our Evolutionary Leap. Would have been really great to have had that in play at the moment. We could have sacked some creatures and drawn some cards. Seedborn Muse. Oh, there we go. The powerhouse card of the deck. Now we'll also activate Earthcraft once again. We'll tap down the Shaman. Now we'll finally cast our Endurance. We'll pay the 2 life. That will trigger Defiler of Vigor. That does ETB. We're going to choose Rielle to put all of their cards back on the bottom of their library, so that's going to really shrink Rielle down. It also triggers the Great Henge, and that actually causes the Rielle player to scoop it up there. Well, I think with that, the game is pretty much all but over, because that actually does take the triggers off the stack there. And then we move straight to our turn. So we're going to go out the most thematic way possible. We're going to activate Shaman of the Forgotten Ways. We'll decline to use Sylvan Library's ability. And now we'll move to combat for the win. And that is the game done there, guys. All right, let's go to the review and discuss what happened. Well, you couldn't ask for a much better game when it comes to showcasing just what this deck can do. In the early game, both Wildgrowth and Earthcraft allowed us to slow the Urza player down as well as break parity with their stacks effects. But once we moved to the mid to late game, Yeva allowed us to rebuild our board state after that board wipe, and Defiler of Vigor gave us the explosive turns we needed to end the game. If you had any doubt of just how good Defiler of Vigor is in these types of decks, hopefully this game removed all doubt. Operating with instant speed really changes the dynamic of how this deck plays out, as well as how your opponents have to play in response to it. This may appear to be like many other mono green decks, but it's anything but. Well, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed seeing how this green deck that secretly plays like a blue deck performed, so if you've been looking for a deck to field against some control decks, then maybe give this one a try. Until next time, guys.